She mocked me in front of everyone, laughing that I was nothing without her. But then I made her lover's wife show the entire room who the real man was. That night, the game she thought she was winning ended in silence, and all eyes turned to me. Before I dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and leave a comment, because what you're about to hear you won't believe. The dinner was one of those corporate galas that pretends to be casual but drips with competition in every corner. Crystal glasses clinking, waiters in pressed black uniforms moving like shadows, chandeliers throwing golden light across polished tables. Everyone dressed like they had stepped out of a magazine spread. My wife, Hannah, walked in on my arm, though the way she clutched my elbow was more like a performance than affection. She made sure her laughter carried across the room, her head tilting back just enough to show she wanted the attention. To anyone else, we looked like the polished couple at the center of the evening. But I knew better. For weeks, my gut had told me something was wrong, and eventually the truth had clawed its way out. Hannah was cheating, and not just with some faceless nobody she met in secret. She was tangled up with the very man hosting this event, Richard, the CEO of her company. The irony wasn't lost on me. In public, Hannah adored flaunting our perfect marriage, showing off her successful husband like I was part of her accessories. Behind closed doors, she dismissed me as an anchor weighing her down, a placeholder until she could climb higher. She called me empty, useless, a man who wouldn't exist without her. The words didn't just sting, they burned. But I didn't explode. I didn't shout or throw accusations. I let the fire smolder inside me, turning heat into steel. I played my role, quiet, attentive, seemingly oblivious. That night at the gala, I wore a tailored navy suit, sat where she told me to, smiled when she demanded it. But every second, I was aware of Richard 2 tables away, the way Hannah's gaze flicked toward him like she was tethered by invisible strings. Every time she leaned to whisper in my ear, her lips brushing the air more than me, I caught the faint smirk tugging at Richard's mouth as if he and I shared some inside joke. Only the joke was me. I let it happen. I let the charade build. I let the whispers snake around the room as Hannah placed her hand over mine in full view, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she leaned closer and said loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "Where would you even be without me?" A couple at the next table chuckled softly, pretending not to listen, but the words hung in the air like smoke. Hannah smiled wider, tilting her head in triumph, and added, "You'd be invisible." The laughter spread, quiet but sharp, as if she had told the best joke of the night. I sat in silence, my jaw tight but my face unreadable. I didn't give her what she wanted, no anger, no defense, no desperate plea for dignity. Just silence. That silence was my weapon. Because while she thought she was winning, while she thought her lover across the table was basking in victory, I knew something no one else in that room expected. I knew I wasn't the one being humiliated. I knew the stage she had built would collapse beneath her feet, and the harder she laughed, the more brutal her fall would be. And as the glasses lifted and the laughter echoed, I caught sight of her, Claire, Richard's wife, the woman who had always been painted as unreachable, elegant, distant, untouchable. The kind of woman who could silence a room with a single glance. Our eyes met across the glittering table, and for the briefest moment, a flicker of something passed between us. Not pity, not shock, something sharper, something that said she knew. And I sat back in my chair, steadying my breath, letting Hannah's laughter fill the space around me. She thought the night belonged to her. She thought I was invisible. But the truth was, the night hadn't even begun. The laughter didn't stop after that first cruel jab. It only grew sharper as Hannah's confidence swelled. She thrived on the attention, as if each chuckle, each sideways glance from our peers was proof she had cemented her power over me. She leaned closer to Richard, her so-called boss, though everyone at that table could see the way her hand grazed his arm, lingering longer than any respectable wife should dare. Her voice rose over the clatter of silverware and the low hum of conversation. "My husband here, he's a good man. Quiet, predictable, dependable." She stretched out the last word like it was a leash around my neck. "But let's be honest, without me, He'd never be noticed in a room like this. More laughter. I watched Forks pause midair, eyes darting between me and Richard, lips curling into smug smiles. A man 2 seats down from me, a financial advisor named Marcus, tried to disguise his grin with a sip of wine, but I caught it. They were enjoying the spectacle, waiting for me to react, to break. But I didn't. I simply sat still, my hands folded loosely on the table, my gaze fixed not on Hannah, not on Richard, but on the glass of red wine in front of me, where the chandelier light fractured into a dozen tiny sparks. What Hannah never understood was silence. She thought silence meant weakness. She thought if I didn't rise to her bait, I had no claws. But silence, when wielded properly, is a blade sharper than any shouted defense. I had learned to let her words bounce off me like dull stones. I had taught myself patience, even as anger carved itself into my chest. Each insult she flung was not a wound. It was a log thrown onto the fire I kept hidden. I remembered the night I discovered the truth, the night her carefully guarded secrets unraveled. I'd come home late from a business trip, earlier than she expected, and the way her phone lit up on the counter with Richard's name told me everything I needed. I didn't answer it. I didn't storm in and confront her. Instead, I watched her face as she noticed the missed call, the way her lips twitched, the brief flicker of panic before she masked it with disdain. "You startled me," she'd said coldly, brushing past me as if my presence was an inconvenience. That was the moment I knew, and that was the moment I decided if she wanted to play her games, I'd play mine. Only mine wouldn't be loud, messy, or desperate. Mine would be precise, devastating, and unforgettable. That's how Claire entered my world. Claire, the immaculate wife who seemed untouchable in every public setting. For years, she stood beside Richard like a statue carved from marble, flawless in her posture, her smile, her carefully measured words. But marble cracks when pressure is applied long enough. Behind her controlled elegance, I discovered something raw and familiar, the exhaustion of betrayal. We met first at a charity function, just the briefest conversation by the dessert table. She asked me about a project I was working on, her tone polite but her eyes searching. And in those eyes, I recognized the same loneliness that had been gnawing at me for months. It was not immediate, not some reckless explosion of passion, but a slow burn. A shared glance here, a wordless understanding there. Until the night when her hand brushed mine under the table, and neither of us pulled away. Now, as I sat at that gala dinner, enduring Hannah's loud performance, I felt no shame. I felt no fear. Because Claire's presence across the room was the quiet thunder Hannah could never anticipate. She sat beside Richard, her poise unshaken, her hands folded gracefully on the table. But her eyes never left me. They flicked to Hannah when the laughter peaked, then back to me, steady, unblinking, as though she was waiting for her moment. Hannah continued her charade, her voice dripping with venom disguised as humor. "You know," she said, raising her glass, "when I married him, I thought I could turn him into something. But some men, well," she smirked, her lips curling as she let the implication hang in the air. Richard chuckled under his breath, not loudly but enough for the people nearest to hear. My wife basked in it, her eyes shining with cruel triumph. She thought she was untouchable, with the CEO by her side, with the laughter of peers validating her lies. Inside, my calm only deepened, because I knew the higher she climbed on this fragile ladder of mockery, the further she would fall when the truth tore the floor out beneath her. My silence wasn't cowardice. It was the sound of a storm gathering just out of sight. Claire shifted slightly in her seat. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. The tilt of her head, the faint inhale as she prepared to stand. And in that moment, I knew something Hannah didn't. The night didn't belong to her anymore. It never had. It belonged to the one person she had never considered a threat. It belonged to the woman her husband had underestimated. It belonged to Claire. And as the laughter around me swelled again, I sat perfectly still, my pulse steady, my expression calm. I was ready. The room had become a stage, and Hannah relished in being the actress everyone had come to watch. She leaned back in her chair, the delicate fabric of her evening gown shimmering under the golden lights of the ballroom, her laughter spilling into every corner as she continued her performance. The clink of glasses, the murmur of side conversations, the occasional burst of laughter from another table. All of it seemed to fade behind the sharpness of her voice. "You see," she said, gesturing toward me with her manicured hand. "This is what happens when you marry a man who has no ambition, a man content to live in the shadow of greater men. Without me, he'd still be a nobody." She dragged out the last word as if it were poison, her lips curling into a smile meant to wound. The people around us shifted uncomfortably, but most were too captivated by the spectacle to intervene. Richard chuckled at her side, that low, arrogant laugh that I had come to despise. His arm brushed against hers, a casual gesture that spoke volumes to those who knew how to read it. The unspoken language of their affair was written in every glance, every touch, every careless grin. My wife was daring the world to notice, daring me to react. She wanted me to explode, to shout, to cause the scene that would cement her narrative of me as weak and unworthy. But I didn't. I never gave her the satisfaction. Instead, I picked up my glass of wine, swirling it slowly, watching the crimson liquid catch the light like blood under a microscope. My reflection in the glass was calm, almost indifferent, and that indifference was my greatest weapon. Because the truth, the real truth, was standing just a few feet away, cloaked in elegance and silence. Claire. Her presence was like a blade hidden in plain sight, unseen by Hannah but felt by me with every heartbeat. She sat with her back straight, her gown flowing like midnight silk, her face composed into the perfect mask of a dignified wife. Yet her eyes betrayed her. They flicked toward me with quiet intensity, carrying secrets that no one else in that room could fathom. I could feel the weight of them pressing against me, grounding me, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this twisted theater my wife had created. As Hannah raised her glass to another mocking toast, guests chuckled nervously, caught between politeness and discomfort. Some avoided my eyes entirely, unwilling to be drawn into the cruel game. Others watched me closely, waiting for the inevitable eruption they were certain would come. After all, what man could sit silently while his wife flaunted her betrayal beside the very man she betrayed him with? But silence is misunderstood. To most, it looks like weakness. To a select few, it is the mark of control. And tonight, control belonged to me. I thought back to the nights Claire and I had shared, moments carved out of shadows where our pain became the language of our intimacy. She had confessed her suspicions about Richard long before I had revealed my own truth. "He thinks I don't notice," she had whispered one evening, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "He thinks I'm blind." I had told her then that I knew the feeling all too well. Our bond wasn't born from lust alone. It was forged in the furnace of betrayal, in the recognition that we had both been reduced to background characters in the lives of the people who were supposed to love us most. And together we had chosen not to stay silent forever. Hannah's laughter cut through my memory, pulling me back to the present. She leaned into Richard, her lips grazing his ear as if whispering some inside joke, then looked at me with a smirk that dripped venom. "Don't worry," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Richard knows what it's like to deal with mediocrity too. That's why we get along so well." Gasps rippled through the table, followed by stifled laughter. It was cruel, deliberate, and humiliating. Still, I remained unmoved. My calm unnerved her more than any outburst could have. I saw it in the way her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, in the quick flicker of her eyes searching mine for some sign of weakness. She wanted to see me break. She needed it, but I gave her nothing. Claire's hand moved then, so subtly that only I noticed. She placed her napkin gently on the table and adjusted her posture, her body angling ever so slightly toward me. The quiet preparation of someone about to step into the light. My pulse quickened, though my expression remained steady. I knew her well enough to understand that something was about to shift. And though the room was still filled with Hannah's laughter, though Richard continued to sip his wine with that smug grin, I sensed the atmosphere changing. tightening like a string pulled taut. Every word Hannah spoke, every cruel laugh she let out, was another stone stacked higher on the fragile pedestal she had built for herself. And all it would take was the slightest push for it to come crashing down. I sipped my wine once more, savoring the calm before the storm, while the crowd leaned in, hungry for more drama, oblivious to the fact that the drama they were about to witness would not come from me. In that moment, I wasn't a man defeated. I wasn't the shadow she tried to paint me as. I was the storm she never saw coming, and I didn't even need to move a muscle. The ballroom seemed to freeze in time the moment Claire rose from her chair. The gentle scrape of wood against marble echoed like a thunderclap, silencing even the most careless whispers. All eyes shifted toward her, the wife of the CEO, the woman who was always spoken of in hushed tones of admiration. She moved with deliberate grace, her gown flowing behind her like liquid midnight, her presence commanding more authority than any raised voice could. Hannah's laughter caught in her throat, faltering for the first time that night as she realized Claire's attention was no longer directed toward her unfaithful husband, but toward me. Richard straightened in his chair, confused, his smug grin evaporating into uncertainty. Guests leaned forward, sensing the air grow heavier with every step Claire took. She reached me, her heels clicking against the polished floor, and without hesitation, placed her hand on my shoulder. The touch was light yet charged with meaning, as if the entire ballroom floor trembled beneath it. She looked straight at Hannah, her voice calm but cutting, every word designed to pierce through the web of lies my wife had spun. "Strange, isn't it?" she said evenly, her tone smooth but sharp enough to slice the air. To hear a woman mock her husband for being nothing, when in truth, this man is more than you could ever understand. Gasps rose from the guests like a wave, and Hannah's face drained of color. Claire didn't stop there. She let the silence linger for just long enough, then continued, her eyes burning with quiet fury. "While you've been so busy flaunting your so-called prize," she glanced at Richard, who squirmed in his seat, "I discovered what it means to stand beside a real man, a man of strength, a man of loyalty, a man who knows how to love without needing to humiliate the one he's with." The words struck like hammer blows, and I could see Hannah shrinking in her chair, her earlier arrogance dissolving under the weight of the truth. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs, heads turning, faces tightening with curiosity and disbelief. I lifted my gaze slowly, finally allowing myself to meet Hannah's eyes. The expression on my face was calm, almost serene, but there was steel in my silence. I didn't need to say anything. Claire had spoken for both of us, and the truth in her words left no room for denial. Richard's hand trembled as he set down his glass too quickly, the clink ringing louder than he intended, betraying his unease. He tried to muster a grin, but his lips twitched, his confidence crumbling before everyone. Claire turned slightly, her hand still resting firmly on my shoulder, and then she spoke the words that shattered the room. "The lover you thought was your secret, the man you paraded as proof of your triumph, means nothing compared to the one standing here. Because this man, your husband, is mine. And he is everything you've pretended to have but never truly known." The silence that followed was absolute. Forks froze halfway to plates. Champagne glasses hung suspended in midair. And then came the whispers, sharp and urgent, darting across the room like sparks. Hannah's face turned scarlet, her lips parting as if to speak, but no sound came out. She looked from me to Claire, to the sea of faces staring at her, and then to Richard, who sat frozen in stunned disbelief. In that moment, the entire stage she had set crumbled beneath her feet. The woman who had mocked, laughed, and humiliated me stood exposed and powerless, her carefully crafted performance ruined by a truth she never imagined could exist. I leaned back in my chair, finally allowing myself a small, measured smile. I raised my glass in a slow, deliberate toast, the crystal catching the chandelier's glow. My voice was calm, steady, and quiet, yet it cut through the murmurs around us. "To honesty," I said, my eyes locked on Hannah's, "and to masks finally falling." A ripple of gasps and scattered applause spread through the hall, not for Hannah, not for Richard, but for the power of the moment that had just unfolded. Hannah pushed back her chair, her hands trembling as she fumbled for words, but none came. Her arrogance had been replaced with humiliation, her pride with shame. Richard looked no better, his jaw clenched, sweat beading on his forehead under the heat of so many stares. The empire of deceit they had built together had collapsed in a single sentence, spoken by the very woman they underestimated. Claire sat down gracefully, her composure unshaken, her hand brushing against mine as if sealing the pact we had both embraced long before this night. The audience around us returned slowly to their meals, though the air still buzzed with whispered speculation and stolen glances. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone. The truth had been revealed in the most spectacular fashion, and there was no undoing it. Hannah lowered her gaze, her voice breaking into a whisper meant only for herself, though I heard it. How could you? But the answer didn't matter. It wasn't me who had destroyed her. It was her own cruelty, mirrored back at her, amplified by the presence of the one woman she never thought would betray her illusions. I finished my glass of wine, setting it down gently, savoring the sweet, final taste of victory. I had not raised my voice, I had not lashed out in anger, and yet I had won in a way more complete than any outburst could have delivered. The humiliation she intended for me had boomeranged back, twice as sharp, cutting her deeper than she ever thought possible. And as the room began to buzz with conversations again, one truth remained undeniable. I was no longer the shadow in Hannah's story. I was the revelation, the man who had played his silence into strength. And in that moment, as Claire's words echoed in the stunned silence that had preceded them, I knew what power truly felt like. In that moment, she realized what I had known all along. Silence isn't weakness. Silence is preparation. And when it finally breaks, it speaks louder than any scream ever could. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Your support means everything, and there are many more stories like this waiting to be told.